Ohio State wins the national championship, and that tells us something about Oregon.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day if you're watching on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Plenty of Ohio State chatter today because they won the national championship, and I'm going to remind you that Oregon beat that team. Several takeaways there. Chip Kelly took a shot at Oregon. I have some thoughts on that, and the playoff changes that Oregon fans want, not on the way immediately. This episode, by the way, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Also, real quick, you'll notice in the description below, there's a link to a GoFundMe if you were able to give anything. A former Oregon Duck cheerleader and classmate of mine is going through something unthinkably horrible. If you are able to help him out right now, that would be very, very much appreciated. So, Ohio State wins the national championship. Just let that sink in for the moment. They were clearly the better team. When Ohio State was playing at their best, there was nobody in the country that could knock them off. Oregon wasn't able to. When they were playing great football and they did most of the game against Notre Dame wasn't able to. Texas wasn't able to. Ohio State made a bunch of mistakes against Notre Dame. Or Ohio State made a bunch of mistakes against Texas. They made a couple late in the game that allowed Notre Dame to get back into it. But when Ohio State was playing well, they were the best team in college football. That's the way it looked to a lot of people on paper before the season. They'd put a lot of money in NIL into this particular roster. They had a bunch of talent. They had a bunch of returners. And guess what? When they put it all together, they were the best team in the country. So you know what that tells me about Oregon? That they were, in fact, good enough to win the national championship. No, they were not good enough on that particular day, January 1st in Pasadena. But Oregon is one of two teams that can say, we beat the national champions. Well, they did. Beat another team that got to the playoff semifinal in Penn State, and they were decidedly the better team in that game as well. Kind of like the national championship game. Oregon got a big lead, and then there was a comeback. But, at the end of the day, you kind of thought, this team is just better. So Oregon was, in fact, good enough. You were not making it up in your head to win the national championship. But they were not good enough on January 1st. This is a really important distinction to make because this Oregon team is one that I talked about since before the season. I predicted them to go 12-0. I thought they would win the Big Ten championship once I saw that it was Penn State, which they did. And it has left a sour taste in the mouth of Oregon fans. I know, I've been waking up with it every day, and it's going to continue for the entire month of January, maybe February and March until the spring game, quite frankly. But that's just going to be lingering in the back of my mind, that Dan Lanning in his third year had a team that if they played well enough was able to win the national championship, but they didn't play well enough. But you weren't making it up in your head. And yeah, Michigan also had a win against Ohio State. That said more about what Ohio State did that day and the ineptitude of coaching that took place in that game. That wasn't about Michigan beating Ohio State as much as it was Ohio State losing to Michigan. Oregon just beat Ohio State. Yep, they were at Autzen Stadium. It turns out having home field advantage makes a difference. It's why I would like playoff teams that get a bye to have a home playoff game. We'll talk about that more later on today's show. But I was watching that game and thought going into it, Ohio State's the best team when they're playing their best. Well, guess what? As we saw, every team doesn't play their best football every single day. But I know a lot of Oregon fans are feeling pretty down right now. I know a lot of Oregon fans are wondering, when's that season going to come? Can we actually get to that level? The answer is yes. Because the difference between Oregon and Michigan, the only two teams to beat Ohio State this year, is Oregon did it because of how well they played and in spite of mistakes they made, while Michigan didn't play a perfect game, was able to pull that off because Ohio State wasn't trying to win the game as much as they were trying to make a statement during that game. So That's the first takeaway. Second takeaway is when I watch other teams, particularly Ohio State, the biggest difference between Ohio State's defense and Oregon's defense is the play of the safeties. Caleb Downs is incredible. I mean, that guy is a really good football player. And Lathan Ransom is a really, really good football player. But that's the biggest difference. That's the biggest gap that I saw watching Ohio State's defense, watching Notre Dame's defense, or Texas's defense as well. I didn't see a massive gap in the production from the cornerbacks. The safety position, yep, definitely saw it. So that's an area that I want to see Oregon continue to improve and develop and bring in high-end talent as best they can. So, which leads me to a couple mailbag questions, these thoughts on Ohio State, that is. This one came from Bud, who's a Locked On Ducks insider. That means he gets priority access and a bunch of other perks as well. You can below a link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. Bud asks, looking ahead to next year, given the number of Buckeye players who are graduating or going to the NFL, how do you think they will match up against Oregon next season? Well, first important distinction, Oregon does not play Ohio State in the regular season next year, nor do they play Michigan, who will be a much improved team. They could play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, but frankly, I view Oregon and Ohio State as being in the same camp as they were this year. It's just a different camp. I didn't phrase that perfectly. This year, Oregon and Ohio State brought in some key transfers, including but not limited to a veteran quarterback, had a bunch of key returners that could have gone to the NFL draft, have a very experienced, incredibly talented roster, and have head coaches that have proven they can do a lot of great things. Ryan Day's obviously more proven than Dan Lanning at this point. He's also been in college football for longer. But next year, you're going to lose a lot of guys. I expect both teams to be in the playoff and Big Ten championship discussion. I don't have the same national title expectations for either team in 25 as I did in the 2024 season, because you're just losing a lot. Ohio State's going to lose a bunch of guys. Oregon's going to lose a bunch of guys. Guess what? Both teams use the portal pretty darn well, Oregon especially, and both teams recruit really well. So they should still have enough talent to be towards the top of their conference. If they were to match up in the Big Ten championship game, I don't know enough about Ohio State's roster right now to know where they're going to be, but they're going to be in a similar spot to Oregon. They're going to be developing a new quarterback who's never started a full season. They're going to be replacing a bunch of seniors that'll be playing on Sundays very, very soon. There were a lot of similarities between these teams this year, and there will be next season as well. So those sorts of games, if they were to play in the Big Ten championship game, would come down to who has the better day, who executes better, who makes fewer mistakes, who's got the better game plan, who's able to make better adjustments during the game. That's what it tends to come down to. Ohio State was better at that on January 1st, and Oregon was better at that on October 12th. So this question came from Summit. Hey, Spencer, I'm an everydayer and have been since the early days of your podcast. Appreciate that, man. I have a question. I have friends who are Oregon fans who say if Ohio State wins tonight, Oregon gets an honorary national title. How do you feel about that? Nope. Now, I was pulling for Ohio State. I was absolutely wanting that just for my own mental calmness. Like, as frustrating as it is to have another great season and national title opportunity gone by the wayside and results in a non-national championship season, there is a part of me that felt better after Ohio State won that game, because I went, what we were watching, what I discussed on the show, what we all talked about going back and forth, as I have with so many of you for a long time and love doing in the offseason too, by the way, it wasn't imaginary. It was indeed a legitimate opportunity. Oregon beat the national champions. Only two teams in the country can say that. The other one lost five football games this year. Oregon lost 0 other football games this season. So not into the honorary national championship business, because that's not what Oregon's goal is. But certainly I did feel a little bit better that Lanning's going to be able to get it there, because in year 3 as a head coach, he was at that sort of level. Do you think he's going to get worse? Do you think he's going to regress, run out of talent, not have the guys to compete with the best teams in the country? Because that's not the way it looks, the way they recruit, the way they bring in transfer portal guys. It looks like they're going to continue to be in this discussion year in and year out. Now, some chances still might be better than others, but it reassured me that Dan Lanning can get Oregon to that level, and I believe that he can. So those are just some of the many thoughts after Ohio State won the national championship, but I want to hear yours because those are the ones that I have. I'm, of course, the only person here recording the show, so drop him in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter as well. Before the game, our old pal Chip Kelly took a shot at Oregon. We should address this shot because it was completely warranted. First, though, we should talk about FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app, it's easy to navigate. They've got a variety of bets to keep every game exciting. The NFL playoffs are this weekend. Conference Championship Sunday is on the way. We only have 3 days of football left. You want to make the most of them? FanDuel's going to help you do that to add extra excitement to the playoffs. FanDuel's got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. They've got Oregon as the preseason number 3 odds team to win the national championship next year. You tell me if you think they're worth that. I think it's a touch high, but they shouldn't be outside the top 10. So whatever it is, make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I've never regretted a second segment sip. That and an In-N-Out double-double. Either one. I've never had that experience and thought, I shouldn't have done that. No, it's a good idea. Every single time. So Chip Kelly took a shot at Oregon before the national championship game. I don't know if any of you saw this, but I was intrigued by it, shall we say, because I have always been a big fan of Chip Kelly. Since he departed Oregon, I've always rooted for him because of what he did for the Ducks, because of how he was treated whilst building Oregon into a perennial national power. But a couple days ago, he said, quote, I'll tell you what, he was asked about, the Oregon game and, the late game situation where Lanning read the rule book and put 12 on the field and whatnot. He said, quote, I'll tell you what, it was a unique message with our players. You can't stop us with 11. You had to stop us with 12, Kelly said. You saw the final results of 11 versus 11, so that was a message to our team for the week leading up to the Rose Bowl that I think resonated really well with our guys. Well, first of all, if that was a big message, it clearly worked. That's the first thing. The second thing is if an Oregon coach made a quote like that, but was in the Ohio State position, Oregon fans would go bananas. I would go crazy and be like, this is the coolest thing ever. It doesn't feel great to be on the other end of it, but I don't think this is Chip Kelly wanting to get back at Oregon and make them, pay for this, that, and the other. I don't think it's that at all. Like, this is a completely fair quote to make. And by the way, the Lanning 12 men on the field thing, the rule got changed quickly. It should have. But Lanning was also brilliant to use it in that particular moment because the flag was thrown and they said, we'll give you 5 yards, but we'll bring, however many seconds off the clock. That was a worthwhile calculation for him. And guess what? It absolutely was. But I saw this and a couple different people had sent it to me and we're saying, oh man, why this, why that, and Chip Kelly. And then, people had negative responses on Twitter and such, which is, pretty par for the course for Twitter, of course. But if Will Stein made that sort of coach when that had been done to Oregon, you'd love it. Because at the end of the day, you're not mad at that quote. You're not mad at Chip Kelly. What you are mad at is the fact that Oregon played a poor game against Ohio State and got outcoached on January 1st by Chip Kelly and others. That's what you're actually upset about there. If you hear that quote and think, why is he taking a shot at Oregon? He's just bitter. He was nothing at all. No, I don't think it's really that complicated or goes that deep. Maybe it was just great messaging. I mean, every single week after Oregon's 13 wins this year, what was something that I always talked about? Whatever motivational tick Dan Lanning used on Ducks versus them. This is what really good coaches do. They push whatever buttons they have to get their team in the right mindset. Well, clearly Chip pushed the right buttons. Clearly that's something that worked for Ohio State. And everything that Lanning did throughout the year until the Rose Bowl worked really well for Oregon. So I have absolutely no problem with him saying that. If you don't want to be able to say it, well, Oregon's got to go out there and win the football game. But alas, they did not. So I didn't think this was a part of the Chip Kelly revenge tour or anything like that. I think it was him making an honest comment, and I have no idea how involved that quote actually was at practice throughout the week, but he was asked a question by a reporter. He answered it. It's a good answer. It's a great answer, because trust me, if it were on your side, the other example that pops in my head with this, with regards to coach quotes, that gets flipped around if the shoe's on the other foot, is, which is a particularly apt metaphor here with regards to Nike and such. But when Carlos Lachlan was at Oregon, I used to see comments all the time, no soft baked cookies or soft batch cookies or whatever, his tagline was when he was Oregon's running back coach. I mean, no, none of that. And then he goes to Ohio State. He is a soft batched cookie. Soft baked. We don't want him. He's not any good. Like, there's a tribal nature to sports. It's okay. You can lean into it. It's all right. But I thought it was a great quote, quite frankly. I saw it and thought, yeah, that's how I'd want my coach to respond to a situation like that. And it worked out pretty well for him. So that was the first thing. Wrapping up, well, not entirely, but mostly on the Ohio State. The Ohio State aspect of today's show. This question came from, I believe, a Locked On Ducks insider. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't jot down my notes perfectly on who sent me this question. But do people forget that Evan Stewart didn't play in the Rose Bowl? No, I'm not saying Oregon wins if he did play, but he burned OSU in the first game. Him not being out there allowed Ohio State to just focus on stopping Tez. If Smith didn't play, does Ohio State's offense score that much? I think you make a valid point here. And Evan Stewart got dinged up going into the Rose Bowl, and clearly that disrupted Oregon's game plan at some level. Because, yes, Jim Knowles outcoached Will Stein, and that was a big factor because Ohio State's defense was really good. And by the way, I have not done a full rewatch of the Rose Bowl yet. It's still too fresh. I will at some point, and I'll have some thoughts on, what all went down, or more thoughts, I should say. I've obviously had plenty of thoughts on what went down there, but yeah, it clearly plays a factor. I mean, Justice Lowe is an, I think, incredibly capable wide receiver and can have a bright career with the Ducks. Evan Stewart went 7 for 145 and a touchdown on mostly Denzel Burke and this Ohio State secondary. They torched this unit through the air in a way that nobody else did this season. And Evan Stewart was a big part of that because he made some ridiculously contested catches and ran some really good routes, and Gabriel threw some really good passes and such. And he was also given the opportunity to have 1v1 situations, I think more than what Oregon's receivers were able to come up with in the Rose Bowl. And, the inability of Oregon to run the ball was ultimately, I think, just a death nail against that Ohio State defense because it's really good, well-schemed, well-coached, bunch of talented players at every single position group. But I don't think Oregon wins the game if Evan Stewart plays. I do think the offense scores more than once, at least gets a field goal somewhere. Like, you can't take a guy out who is that singularly impactful and then say, well, Oregon's offense would be the same. No, it's not. Trayshawn Holden's really good. I'm a huge Trayshawn Holden fan. Stewart had the matchups that they wanted to take advantage of in the first Ohio State game. Now, Holden obviously wasn't there because of the spitting incident. He got ejected for the game, rightfully so. But yeah, it's a factor. You take Jeremiah Smith out of the Rose Bowl, and no, I don't think Ohio State has 34 points. Do I think they have over 20? Yes. Do I think Oregon still has less than 13? Yes, absolutely. So it's closer, but no, I don't think Oregon wins. I think it makes a difference. But having Stewart back for next year, I'm really excited to see what this wide receiving core becomes, because you're going to have a veteran in Evan Stewart, a semi-veteran, like Malik Benson's kind of a veteran, kind of not. Like, he's just someone that I don't really know because I haven't seen him put together an entire season where he's been a primary target in a capable passing offense. But I love the options and the depth that Oregon's receiving core is going to have next year. I think DeCorian Moore could absolutely be a starter right away. And I also think that the way that receiver room plays out can be largely decided in spring football, because I know what Stewart's going to be. Everything else is kind of a question mark. And that's okay. That's okay. That doesn't mean that the wide receiver room can't be as productive and talented as it was a season ago. I actually legitimately think that it can be, but it just makes it one of the most interesting groups because the least number of positions have been decided. And I think spring ball is going to tell us a lot on that front. But Stewart coming back, do not undersell in your head the importance of having him there, because there are so many unknown commodities. You want to have one known, one sure thing, and Evan Stewart is that. We also have a sure thing, it appears, about the playoff format next year. It's not what we were hoping for, unfortunately. First, though, a reminder, this episode brought to you by PrizePicks, the place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, PrizePicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right. 1,000 times your cash just by making a few simple picks. So you could have taken Lamar Jackson over 250 passing yards, under 250 passing yards. Travis Kelce, he's got props. Josh Allen, they're all over there at PrizePicks. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. That's pretty darn good. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, just for playing a $5 lineup, you get $50. It's that easy. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. So I think Oregon fans are in pretty uniform agreement, and I am as well, after having a different opinion before the Big Ten championship game, that this playoff structure with the 12-team format where you get the 4 byes given to the highest-ranked conference champions, regardless of where they're actually ranked and where they should be playing and whatnot, and then the national champion ends up being the 8 seed in this tournament, and Oregon gets them as the first playoff game. And Oregon never gets to play a home game, but Ohio State does, and Penn State did as well. So Oregon beats those 2 teams and doesn't go as far as either one in the college football playoff. Well, it is reasonable, and I will again go out and say the first thing Oregon fans should think of with regards to this season, and I'm seeing this going around way too often in the wrong direction online, the first thing you should think of is Oregon was not ready to roll in the Rose Bowl, and they got out-coached. That is the number one factor why Oregon did not play a competitive game in the Rose Bowl or go on to win the national championship. It was not the long layoff. It was not the Ohio State matchup. They got out-coached. And this same staff out-coached Ohio State back on October 12th. But in the playoff setting, they got worked. Happens. And it happened to Oregon in a bad way that day. It is completely fair, though, as long as that is your first thought, to have your second thought be, why did Oregon have such a difficult path when they had the best regular season in all of college football? That is a completely fair question to ask. Lanning's never going to say it. Players should never say it. It's not how you should be thinking internally in a locker room. That's what I'm here for. That's what other people are here for, so that we can look at the situation and say, hey, this is not the best way to adjudicate a champion or to set up a playoff. But ESPN's Heather Dinich reported that changes to the college football playoff format are not going to arrive in 2025. So we'll be facing the same potential dilemma if Oregon goes in the Big Ten championship game. Now, maybe the seeding works out differently, and it will be advantageous if Oregon is in that spot again, say as an 11-1 or 10-2 team or what have you. If they're able to accomplish that, maybe it will be an advantage based on who you're going to end up playing to win the Big Ten championship game. But unquestionably, if I could go back in time, I would say, hey, Oregon, go lose this Big Ten championship game. You'll be better off. because you won't have the long layoff, you'll get a home playoff game, and you will have an easier lineup of teams to try and go through to get to the national championship. And that proved to be the case because, well, the national champion was there for, you literally could not have had a more difficult first game. Neutral site against the eventual national champs. So, if you want changes, I understand it and I agree with you. However, I regret to inform you, they will not arrive in 2025. They could in 26, but it looks like we're going to be stuck with the same old format. We'll get to play this wonderful game of, do you want to win your conference championship? Do you even want to be in your conference championship? And you know what? I said earlier last week on the show that I don't have the same national championship expectations for Oregon. If they're going to prove me wrong in that sense and make a run, I'd like for them to have a home playoff game. First ever college football playoff game at Autzen. Sign me up for that in 2025. And that's entirely possible. If Oregon goes 10-2, makes the playoff, if they go 11-1, make the playoff, but miss the Big Ten championship game, maybe Penn State's playing Ohio State, then guess what? Oregon could have a playoff game at Autzen Stadium. Well, it doesn't seem like such a bad thing. I dare anybody to go into Autzen Stadium and try and win. The national champions could not win in Autzen Stadium this past year. So it's pretty difficult, as it turns out. This question came from Brandon. Question for the mailbag. I asked this question before the season started, and now it's over. What do you think, Spencer? What defense? It'd actually be which defense is better? Sorry, I'm a grammar shark. But which defense was better Which defense was better? This year's defense or 2019? Well, I'm still going with this year. Going back to what I said in the first segment, that Ohio State winning confirms to me that everything we thought and felt about this team during the season was indeed true. This team was as good as we thought. They just weren't good enough on one particular day. That's a distinct difference there. That 2019 defense put up some really, really good numbers. So did this year's team. But this is a significantly deeper defensive line. It's the best Oregon defensive line that I've seen in my life. At least the best one since DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead were both along the defensive line. Those two guys, I think, are higher end NFL. I know are higher end NFL draft prospects than anyone on this D line, except for maybe Mateo. But the depth on this line, significantly stronger, I think, than what you had back then. I would take 2019 secondary after how this season came to a close, but I still saw a lot of good things from the Oregon secondary this year, particularly at the cornerback position. I thought Brandon Johnson was great. Like, your lasting image based on the Rose Bowl of this team in any position group is not what actually happened throughout the course of the year. It's what you're going to remember the most, and that's what sucks. But this is still a great defense. And the secondary, yeah, the safety play can improve 100%. That doesn't mean that it was some abomination on the field that is just a complete and total disaster. No, it wasn't that at all. It just wasn't at a national championship level compared to the other teams that I saw. Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State. When I watch their safeties play, they are rangier, they are more athletic, and they make more plays. They're just more involved. They're around the ball, making impact plays a lot more than what I've seen out of Oregon safeties the last couple of years. And that 2019 team had Verone McKinley, who in 2021 became an All-American, led the country in interceptions. It had Brady Breeze. You had Javon Holland, who is the ideal nickel. He could play any safety position. That guy is so awesome, just fantastically good. So, yeah, I take the 2019 secondary, but the other two position groups, linebackers, defensive line, even with Kayvon Thibodeau on that 2019 team, I take Oregon's defense in 2024. So I really like what Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy are doing on that side of the ball. There are improvements that need to be made. I think they're going to do that, though. They're certainly bringing in the talent to give themselves the opportunity at the very least. So optimism is going to be a recurring theme on this show. Because after Ohio State won it all, I feel more optimistic about Oregon than before Ohio State won it all. Really. Ohio State was the best team. Oregon beat them this year. So yes, Dan Lanning can build Oregon to a national championship level. And I think he will continue to do so. A reminder, if you are able to donate anything to the fundraiser below, please help out a former Oregon cheerleader and classmate of mine. So thank you all in advance. I appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.